So, Ete Discipuli, I've been fielding a number of questions from you regarding the project at the end of Module 1. So I thought I would show you some portions of some of the projects that were completed last semester by the students. I don't want to show you all of their project, like I don't want to show you each project in its entirety because I don't want to steal your creativity. I just want to give you an idea of what they look like and sound like. Here's one example that was done using VoiceThread.
Eitus primus erat heroica. Erat bellum, sed se erat iustum. There were many heroes in this war, in a war that changed history of the world. These heroes will be written in our American history forever. Secunda aetas erat aena. Erat multum bellum, homines multi peribant. This was the bloodiest war in U.S. history. The cruel weapons of Mars were used with deadly efficiency during this age.
So as you can see, this student read one of his Latin sentences and the other he did not. After he read his second original Latin sentence, he went on to make additional comments about that specific time period or age in American history. One of the things I think that could be improved is that the explanation in English of the time period and description of it could be more detailed. What were the specific years that we were talking about? What is the specific war that he is referring to? Here is his conclusion. I think that one of the things that could be improved if you use VoiceThread is to actually speak more instead of just writing the comments. And here he has his list of resources. While VoiceThread is an acceptable tool to use for this project, I don't believe that it is the most effective tool for telling the story about the ages of man in the United States. Now I'd like to show you another example that was done using a screencast, which is when you take a movie of your computer screen, like I'm doing right now, and then uploading it to YouTube. So let's hear what this one sounds like.
Hello, my name is Camilla, and I will be presenting the ages of American mankind. For this presentation, I decided to look at generations instead of different events or eras, because generations are, by definition, a group of people who think alike and have the same unique ideas to their generations, which I think is very similar to The Original Ages of Man by Bonnie A. Cato. I'm sorry if I stuttered on that one. Prima aetas est aena, homines erant validas in bello. The first age was of bronze. The men were strong in war. For this one, I decided that the generation that represents this age is the Greatest Generation, or the GI generation, which was born between 1901 and 1927. This generation lived through World War II and Pearl Harbor. Because of this, most of them were thrown into war, which reminded me of how the Bronze Age perished in battle. They were also very strong mentally, although physically they must have been as well. Sadly, most of them suffered from PTSD after the war, and once again, like the Bronze Age, perished in war.
So this one is a very good example of how the student has one slide that introduces the age with the Latin sentences, and it actually on that slide gives the title of the generation that she's speaking of in American history, and then relates that to the age in the Latin. The second slide, she gives a nice illustration and a very nice verbal explanation as to why she picked this specific generation to represent the Bronze Age, even comparing what she knew about this specific generation of American history to what she learned about the Bronze Age from the ancients. Let's take a look at another example of one of her ages. This one is the third age.
Aetas heroicum, hominis erant iutus. The third age was called the heroic age. Men were just. For this stage, I decided to go with the baby boomer generation, who were born between 1946 and 1964. They mostly lived through many civil rights protests and the assassination of people like Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy. I thought of them being just because they were courageous and spirited like the men in the heroic age. They also lived through the Vietnam War, which reminded me of how many of the men from the heroic age died in the Trojan War, but some still survived enough to make a home to their land where their crops were flourishing, or in this sense, the soldiers from the Vietnam War came home to see how their people were flourishing with these new ideas of civil rights and peace.
As you can see, her first age and her third age are constructed very much the same. Her title page with the Latin sentences and English translations. She read her Latin sentences aloud. You are not required to. And then her second page where she has some sort of image to exemplify something from that specific age or time period. And then her comparison or an explanation about why she feels it should be that particular age. Let's see if we can listen in on her conclusion.
Reading The Ages of Man and connecting it to the present day gave me more of an insight on different eras in the past and the future. This goes to show how, no matter how old a text may be, there is also something that we can pull from it to help us in our lives. Now, the one thing that I hope is that we don't meet the same dreary fate as the Age of Iron, and that we can just thrive as a society. The links to the images in this video are going to be in the description box below, and I thank you for watching.
I have a couple of other examples. Again, this one is going to look very different, and the answers that the student gave are going to be very different, but that's okay. This assignment is about asking you to think and evaluate and support your ideas based upon the choices that you make, and making connections between our life today or our history today and that of the ancients. So there are many right answers for this project. It's a matter of how are you going to use something that you've learned about the ancient world and have that to help you understand and interpret things that you see in our world. So let's take a look at this one. Let's go back to the beginning and see how it starts.
The Ages of Man by Jana Mundok. The first age of man was the Golden Age. It was full of peace and lacked fear and punishment. Sickness and old age were unheard of, and the fields provided an abundance of food. The Golden Age did not remind me of a specific time in American history, but it reminded me of the moments right after war has ended where everyone is rejoicing of victory. Everybody is happy and peaceful, and there is no longer war. The Age of Silver followed the Golden Age as the second age of man, and it was much worse than the Golden Age. Jupiter was king, boys grew into miserable men, eternal spring ended, and extreme summer and winter occurred. Jupiter destroyed the class of silver. The Silver Age reminds me of the period of time that leads to war, where we are in a deep depression and no one is very happy.
So I think that right away you can see how this presentation is very different. Number one, it doesn't use as many pictures as perhaps I would have liked the presentation to have. So that's something that could be improved. Number two, it's very different in that the individual who has created this presentation begins not just by showing us her sentences, but by describing what the specific age she's talking about was like in the ancient world. And then she discusses how or where she sees that type of age and its characteristics in our history today. She's focused not on a specific stretch of years or a generation, but instead on very specific frames of time that perhaps happen over and over again. Her answer is very different from those of her classmates, but still shows that she has a concept of how this idea of talking about ages in the past can also be used as a way to talk about the types of and lifestyles of living that occur within the history of our United States. Let's take a quick look at her conclusion.
Yes. The Age of Silver was full of misery and depression. The Age of Bronze was full of proving strength and power, and the Age of Iron was full of rebuilding before peace.
So it looks like what she did for her conclusion was she named all of the ages that she talked about and summarized them with a 2 or 3 word specific phrase that she thought really captured that particular moment in time. And I have one more example to share.
The Bronze Age is the title of this story. This will be referring to the Great Depression in our time now. The Great Depression is the same as the Bronze Age because people struggled finding food. The Great Depression also had leaders that were allowing the Great Depression to happen. The Silver Age now refers to kids who need 100 years to grow up. Some kids nowadays are just like the kids in the Silver Age. They were very immature and did not live long enough.
So here we can see that our creator of this particular film again thought about what time periods, whether they are with history, like the Great Depression, or in our current time now when referring to children, and talked about how they related to those specific ages in the story, The Ages of Man, that we have read. So these are some examples of how you can put together your film There are a variety of tools that you can use to do that. Since I think all of you are Hempfield students, yeah, certainly you are familiar with using iMovie or Adobe Spark. If you are using a school computer, it has a QuickTime Player on it, which you can use to make a screen recording, which is what I've done here. You can use Doceri as a tool to make a recording. There are lots of different tools that you can use. Those are just a few that I have mentioned. If you have trouble uploading the entire film into Moodle, I suggest trying to upload it into YouTube. It will actually give you a link then that you can just put into Moodle. Otherwise, if all you need to do is attach the movie. So yeah, those are some examples, and I hope that helps to clear up any questions you have about the assignment.